There is a creature moving through the ocean right now, gliding through water so deep and so dark that no sunlight has ever reached it. And yet this animal knows exactly where it is going. The blue whale is the largest being that has ever lived on this planet, larger than any dinosaur, larger than anything the fossil record has ever given us. And somehow, it spends its days in a kind of quiet that most of us can only dream of. Tonight, we will follow it gently. We will drift alongside the longest migrations on Earth, and somewhere along the way, you may begin to wonder how something so enormous can move through the world so softly, and why its voice, the deepest on the planet, carries a message that scientists are only now beginning to understand. So let the room go still, feel the bed beneath you grow softer, and let yourself sink slowly into the deep blue, where the world's most gentle giant is already waiting. There is something remarkable about the way a blue whale speaks. It does not bark or chirp or call in ways we easily recognize. Instead, it produces low, rolling pulses of sound, so deep in frequency that the human ear cannot fully hear them without technology to translate them upward into range. These sounds sit below 20 Hz, what scientists call the infrasound range, and they travel through ocean water not in short bursts, but in long, sustained moans that can last for 30 seconds or more. When you slow them down and raise their pitch, they resemble something ancient, something almost geological, the groan of deep rock under pressure, or the long exhale of a continent settling. What makes these sounds even more extraordinary is how far they travel. Sound moves through water roughly 4 times faster than through air, and at the right depth, known as the SOFAR channel, sound can be bent and focused by layers of temperature and pressure so that it carries almost without loss. Blue whale calls recorded in the North Atlantic have been detected by listening stations thousands of miles away in the Pacific. Some researchers believe that before modern shipping filled the ocean with mechanical noise, 2 blue whales on opposite sides of an ocean basin may have been able to hear each other, not metaphorically, but literally in real time. The ocean was once a vast, quiet library of whale voices. Scientists have spent decades trying to understand why blue whales call at all. The most widely accepted explanation is communication, contact calls between individuals, advertising presence across distances that would otherwise make meeting nearly impossible. A single blue whale might occupy a home range of hundreds of thousands of square miles of open ocean. In such an environment, voice may be the only reliable way to find others of your kind. Some calls appear to follow patterns consistent with male advertisement, a kind of slow, repeating song that broadcasts availability and perhaps fitness. But females also vocalize, and the full purpose of their calls remains gently debated among researchers. One of the stranger discoveries in whale acoustics came when scientists began analyzing recordings across decades and noticed something unexpected. Blue whale calls have been getting lower in pitch since at least the 1960s, gradually across populations and around the world. The shift is subtle, a fraction of a hertz per year in most populations, but it is consistent and global, and no one has yet fully explained it. Some researchers suspect it may be linked to population recovery after whaling, with more individuals in the water, meaning less need to call at maximum power to reach a mate. Others propose changes in ocean noise, or even subtle shifts in body size. The mystery sits quietly in the data, still waiting. There is also evidence that blue whale songs vary by region, forming what some researchers describe as dialects, distinct call patterns that differ between populations in the North Pacific, the Southern Ocean, and the Indian Ocean. Young whales appear to learn these calls not through instinct alone, but by listening to the adults around them. This suggests a degree of cultural transmission, the passing of learned information from one generation to the next through sound. In this way, the blue whale's voice is not only a biological tool, but something closer to a tradition, carried forward through time like an ancient and wordless language passed down quietly in the dark. The ocean around a singing blue whale is not a passive backdrop. Water at depth has physical structure, layers of differing temperature and salinity that bend and reflect sound in complex ways. Whales seem to be aware of this, often calling from specific depths where their voices will carry farthest. Some researchers have recorded blue whales descending to particular depth bands before beginning a calling bout, as though positioning themselves in a natural acoustic corridor. There is something almost deliberate in this, a creature using the physics of its environment to amplify its own presence across space. The ocean, in those moments, becomes a kind of instrument. A blue whale at full size can stretch to 30 meters in length, around 100 feet, and weigh as much as 200 tons. These are numbers that resist easy comprehension. A human being standing next to a blue whale's tail fluke would reach perhaps to the base of it, no higher. The whale's tongue alone can weigh as much as an elephant. Its heart, which we will return to in a moment, is large enough that a small child crawl through its largest artery. And yet, despite this almost incomprehensible mass, the blue whale moves through the ocean with a kind of fluid grace that larger land animals simply cannot achieve. Because water supports weight in ways that air and gravity never can. The reason blue whales can grow so large is intimately tied to water. On land, the skeleton of an animal must bear its own weight at every moment. Each step places mechanical stress on bones, joints, and muscles. There is a physical ceiling to how large a land animal can grow before its skeleton becomes impractical under its own mass. Water removes this constraint entirely. A floating animal is buoyed by the density of the ocean around it, and its bones bear almost none of the gravitational load that a land animal endures. This is why the largest animals in Earth's history have all been aquatic. The ocean is the only environment that makes sizes like the blue whale's possible. The blue whale's internal proportions are just as extraordinary as its outer dimensions. Its cardiovascular system operates at a scale unlike anything in terrestrial biology. Researchers who have examined blue whale hearts recovered from animals that stranded or were taken during the last era of commercial whaling found them to be massive, four-chambered structures weighing several hundred kilograms. The aortic arch, the large vessel leaving the heart, is wide enough to accommodate a human body. Blood moves through this animal in volumes per heartbeat that are themselves difficult to picture, and yet the resting heart rate of a blue whale at the surface is somewhere between 4 and 8 beats per minute. At depth during a dive, it can drop to just 2. The blue whale's metabolism, despite its size, operates with remarkable efficiency. Its lungs can hold roughly 2,500 liters of air, and when it surfaces after a dive, it expels that air in a single explosive breath that can rise 9 meters into the sky. This blow is so powerful and distinctive that experienced researchers can identify individual whales by the shape and height of their spout from a great distance. The exchange of gases in a single breath is estimated to replace up to 90% of the air in the lungs, compared to about 15% in a typical human breath. The whale's body has been shaped over millions of years to make every surface breath count. Beneath the skin of a blue whale lies a thick layer of blubber that serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It insulates the whale against the cold of deep, dark water. It acts as an energy reserve during months when feeding is sparse or impossible. And it contributes to the whale's buoyancy, helping calibrate how much effort the animal needs to maintain depth. The blubber layer can be up to 50 centimeters thick in some parts of the body. Embedded within it and throughout the muscle tissue are vast quantities of myoglobin, the oxygen-binding protein that gives whale muscle its almost black color. and allows the animal to store enough oxygen in its tissues to remain submerged for extended periods without surfacing. What the blue whale's body has essentially done over evolutionary time is solve the problem of living large in a cold, three-dimensional world where food is patchy and travel is continuous. Every dimension of its biology, from its cardiovascular architecture to its blubber chemistry to the slow, measured beat of its enormous heart, reflects tens of millions of years of refinement. The animal that exists today is not simply big. It is precisely, elegantly calibrated to a way of life that no other creature on Earth has ever inhabited in quite the same way. And somewhere in the deep water tonight, one of them is moving forward through the dark. The open ocean is not simply a large space. It is a space without landmarks, without visible boundaries, without the kind of fixed geography that most animals use to orient themselves. For a blue whale, navigating across thousands of miles of featureless water requires something more than ordinary spatial memory. Researchers believe blue whales use a combination of cues to navigate and locate one another across vast distances, including sound, geomagnetic sensing, water temperature gradients, and possibly even the taste and chemistry of the water itself. The picture that emerges is of an animal with a remarkably rich sensory relationship with its environment, one that operates largely below the surface of what we can observe directly. Blue whales, like all baleen whales, lack the echolocation system found in their toothed cousins, dolphins and sperm whales. They do not send out rapid clicking pulses to build a picture of nearby objects. Their low-frequency calls serve communication more than spatial mapping in the immediate sense. And yet they navigate with what appears to be extraordinary precision across ocean basins, returning to the same feeding grounds year after year and meeting potential mates in waters that stretch from millions of square miles. Some part of this must depend on a sensitivity to the Earth's magnetic field, a biological compass that has been documented in a growing number of marine animals, including several whale species. The mechanism in blue whales remains an open question. There is also growing evidence that blue whales track environmental gradients with great sensitivity. Water temperature, salinity, and the chemical signatures of productive upwelling zones where cold, nutrient-rich water rises to the surface all vary in ways that carry spatial information. A whale moving through these gradients can, in a sense, read the ocean the way a hiker reads a landscape, sensing the shape of what lies ahead through subtle changes in what surrounds it now. Some researchers believe this ability to read water chemistry may extend to detecting the presence of krill swarms at a distance, as dense concentrations of prey animals alter the local chemistry of the water around them in detectable ways. And somewhere in the quiet between the other sections of this story, there is something gently waiting to be understood. The blue whale's world is largely invisible to us, and yet we have been listening very carefully for several decades now. What those recordings have slowly begun to reveal is that individual whales may not be strangers to one another in the way we once assumed. Ahead in this story, in the way these animals move and rest and find one another through seasons and years, something quietly surprising begins to make sense. In the early years of satellite tagging, researchers began attaching small transmitters to blue whales to track their movements over time. What the data revealed was not random wandering, but highly directional travel, often covering hundreds of miles in a matter of days without apparent deviation. These tracks suggested that individual whales held a persistent, accurate sense of where they were going, even across open water where no visible landmarks exist. Some researchers have proposed that blue whales may use the angle and intensity of the sun, particularly as filtered through the ocean surface, as a navigational cue. Others have noted that their travel routes sometimes follow the edges of submarine ridges and canyons, raising the possibility that they sense seafloor topography through low-frequency acoustic echoes from their own calls. Finding another whale in the open ocean may also involve patience as much as precision. A blue whale advertising its location through repeated powerful calls over days or weeks is in effect creating a beacon that others can home in on across great distances. Some researchers have observed what appears to be directional travel toward calling individuals, a kind of acoustic following behavior where one whale orients its movement based on the sound arriving from far away. Given how slowly blue whales reproduce, with a calf born only every 2 to 3 years, and how widely spaced individuals can be, finding a mate at the right moment in the right season requires a level of long-range coordination that still fills biologists with quiet admiration. In the deep ocean, connection is always a slow and deliberate thing. Every few minutes, a blue whale must surface. This is not optional. It is the fundamental rhythm of its life, the heartbeat of its existence, in the sense that all other activities are organized around it. Between breaths, the whale dives, sometimes to a few hundred meters, sometimes deeper. And in that submerged world, it feeds, it travels, it rests in its own way, and it is entirely itself. At the surface, for just a few seconds, it returns to the boundary between the ocean and the sky. The blow rises, the air clears, the lungs refill, and then the great body tilts forward and the tail flukes rise slowly above the waterline before sliding back beneath the surface. This moment, the flukes lifting against the sky, is one of the most quietly beautiful sights the ocean offers. Blue whale diving patterns have been studied with increasing precision as tagging technology has improved. During active feeding dives, individuals will often descend to depths between 100 and 300 meters, following the vertical migrations of krill that concentrate at different depths depending on time of day. At night, krill rise toward the surface, drawn by phytoplankton in the shallower, light-touched zone. During daylight hours, they descend into dimmer water to avoid predators. Blue whales track this movement, diving deeper during the day, shallower at night, in what amounts to a continuous negotiation between the cost of diving and the reward of finding prey at the right density. The whale's decisions about when and how deep to dive are, in a quiet sense, economic ones. The physiology that allows a blue whale to make these dives repeatedly over hours and days without apparent fatigue is remarkable. When the animal submerges, its heart rate drops dramatically, from its surface resting rate of 4 to 8 beats per minute down to as few as 2 during the deepest parts of a dive. Blood flow is redirected away from non-essential organs and concentrated in the brain, heart, and muscles. The spleen, which in marine mammals is unusually large and serves as a reservoir of oxygen-rich red blood cells, contracts and releases its stored cells into the bloodstream at the start of a dive, boosting oxygen-carrying capacity. The whole body shifts into a kind of conserved, efficient mode that would be physiologically impossible for a land mammal. There is a particular kind of behavior that researchers sometimes call a lunge, the moment during a feeding dive when a blue whale accelerates toward a dense concentration of krill and opens its mouth wide, engulfing an enormous volume of water and prey together. The whale's throat pouch, made of pleated accordion-like skin, expands dramatically to accommodate this influx, sometimes more than doubling the animal's effective volume in the front half of its body. This expansion slows the whale significantly, and the energy cost of a single lunge is substantial. What makes it worthwhile is the density of the prey. A successful lunge into a dense krill swarm can deliver more energy than the whale expends in several minutes of travel. The calculation, refined over millions of years, works when the krill are there. There is something almost meditative about watching a blue whale cycle through its surfacing and diving rhythm over the course of an hour. It surfaces, breathes 2 or 3 times, and descends again. The interval between surfacings during active feeding is typically 10 to 15 minutes, though whales engaged in longer transit dives may stay down for 20 minutes or more. At the surface, between breaths, the whale is briefly visible, its enormous blue-gray back rolling slowly above the waterline, the small, low dorsal fin appearing well behind the blowhole, and then it is gone again, slipping back into a world where it moves more freely and more quietly than any animal of its size seems to have a right to. The surface is just a place it passes through. The deep water is where it lives. Some of the most interesting behavioral data from tagged blue whales comes from the nighttime hours, when researchers have observed what appear to be extended periods of very shallow, slow movement with minimal diving activity. These patterns may represent a form of rest, not the deep sleep of a land mammal, but a reduced activity state in which the whale lingers near the surface, breathing regularly, allowing its body to recover from the physical demands of the day. Dolphins and other cetaceans are known to sleep with one hemisphere of the brain at a time, maintaining enough consciousness to breathe voluntarily. Blue whales likely do something similar, though the details of their rest behavior remain one of the quieter frontiers of marine biology. Whatever they are doing in those slow nighttime hours, it appears peaceful. A blue whale eats almost nothing but krill. This is one of the most striking facts about the animal, that the largest creature on Earth sustains itself almost entirely on some of the smallest. Antarctic krill, Euphausia superba, are shrimp-like crustaceans roughly 5 centimeters long. They are pink, translucent, and they gather in concentrations so dense that they sometimes turn the surface of the ocean red. A single large swarm of krill can contain millions of individuals. A blue whale in peak feeding season may consume 4 to 6 tons of krill in a single day, filtering them from the water through its baleen plates in continuous lunge feeding bouts. The efficiency of this system is extraordinary, and it depends entirely on the krill being available in sufficient numbers and density. Krill are themselves dependent on phytoplankton, the microscopic algae that grow in sunlit surface waters wherever nutrients are abundant. Phytoplankton flourish where cold, nutrient-rich water rises from depth in upwelling zones, and in polar regions where seasonal mixing brings nutrients to the surface. The Antarctic krill population is intimately tied to sea ice. Their larvae feed on the algae that grow on the underside of ice floes during winter, and their abundance in spring and summer is closely linked to how much sea ice formed in the preceding season. Blue whales that feed in the Southern Ocean are therefore connected, through krill, to the health of the Antarctic ice system, and shifts in that system ripple upward through the food web to the largest animals on Earth. One of the things that has emerged from decades of blue whale research is a picture of how deeply interconnected these animals are with the broader productivity of the ocean. Blue whales are not merely consumers of krill, they are also, in a real ecological sense, producers of the conditions that allow krill to exist. When a blue whale feeds at depth and then rises to the surface, it releases its waste in a liquid plume near the surface. This waste is rich in iron and nitrogen, the very nutrients that phytoplankton need to grow. By feeding deep and defecating shallow, blue whales effectively pump nutrients from the deep ocean to the surface layer, fertilizing the phytoplankton blooms that form the base of the krill's food supply. The whale feeds the krill that feed the whale, in a slow and circular generosity. This nutrient cycling role, sometimes called the whale pump, has been estimated to be ecologically significant at regional and possibly ocean basin scales. Before commercial whaling dramatically reduced blue whale populations in the 20th century, the Southern Ocean contained an estimated 200,000 or more blue whales. At the feeding rates we observe today, that population would have been cycling enormous quantities of nutrients through the surface ocean every season. The collapse of that population may have contributed to shifts in ocean productivity that are still rippling through Antarctic ecosystems today. Recovering the blue whale population is, in this sense, not only a conservation goal, but something closer to an ecological repair. The relationship between blue whales and krill also has a temporal dimension that researchers are only beginning to map fully. Krill populations fluctuate from year to year in response to ocean conditions, and blue whale movements appear to track these fluctuations with impressive sensitivity. In years when krill are scarce in one region, whales that had historically fed there show altered travel patterns, appearing in different areas or arriving later or earlier than usual. Whether this represents individual learning from experience, social information passed between whales, or simply an innate responsiveness to oceanographic cues is not yet fully resolved. What is clear is that the whale's knowledge of its ocean is not fixed. There is a quieter side to the krill story that occasionally surfaces in research literature. Krill are known to produce sounds of their own, small clicking and snapping noises generated during their movement. Some researchers have wondered whether blue whales might be able to detect these sounds at close range, effectively listening for the krill before they can see or smell them. The idea is speculative, and the evidence is not yet compelling enough to form a consensus. But it fits with a broader picture of the blue whale, as an animal whose sensory world is richer and stranger than it appears from the surface. In the dark water, where vision is limited and sound travels far, every kind of signal matters. In 2019, a team at the Royal Ontario Museum completed the preparation of a blue whale heart, recovered from an animal that had stranded on the coast of Newfoundland. It was the first time a blue whale heart had been preserved and displayed in something close to its natural condition, and the result was striking enough to be widely reported. The heart weighed 180 kilograms, about 400 pounds. It was roughly the size of a golf cart. Its 4 chambers were large enough for a person to crawl through its main valves. Standing beside it, researchers described a feeling of quiet disbelief, not because they didn't know the numbers intellectually, but because seeing the actual object made those numbers suddenly real in a way that data tables never quite do. The mechanics of a heart this size, operating inside a living animal, raise genuine physiological questions. How does a muscle this massive contract and relax in a coordinated way? How does the electrical signal that triggers each heartbeat travel across chambers this large without becoming disorganized? The answers appear to lie in the extraordinary specialization of blue whale cardiac tissue. The muscle cells of the heart are unusually large. The conducting fibers that coordinate contraction are thickened and reinforced, and the whole system appears to have evolved specifically to handle the demands of pumping blood at low frequency through an enormous body. Each beat of this heart moves enough blood to fill a bathtub, and it does so at rest, roughly once every 10 to 15 seconds. The heart rate of a blue whale changes dramatically depending on what the animal is doing, and this variability is itself a physiological feat. Researchers have used suction cup ECG tags to record blue whale heart rates in real time through feeding, resting, and diving behaviors. During a feeding lunge near the surface, the heart rate can briefly spike to around 37 beats per minute, the animal's maximum recorded rate, driven by the extreme muscular demands of accelerating its massive body toward prey. During the deep part of a dive, it drops to 2 beats per minute. This dynamic range from 2 to 37 is extraordinarily wide for any mammal, and managing it without arrhythmia or cardiovascular stress requires a level of cardiac control that physiologists are still working to fully understand. What this heart rate flexibility tells us about the blue whale's life is something quietly profound. The animal exists in a world of extremes. the extreme of deep cold dives and the extreme of explosive surface lunges, and its cardiovascular system must serve both. Rather than maintaining a stable middle state, the heart has evolved to swing dramatically between modes as needed. This flexibility is what makes the blue whale's lifestyle physically possible. Without the ability to slow the heart to almost nothing during dives, the animal would burn through its oxygen reserves too quickly. Without the ability to spike it during lunging, the muscles could not generate the force needed to capture prey at the density required to make each energetically expensive feeding bout worthwhile. Blue whale's circulatory anatomy also includes some structural features not found in land mammals. The network of blood vessels near the skin and fins includes a system called the rete mirabile, a Latin phrase meaning wonderful net, a dense interlacing of arteries and veins that allows blood to exchange heat between incoming and outgoing flows. This acts as a countercurrent heat exchanger, helping the whale maintain its core body temperature in cold water, while allowing the extremities to cool down without creating a net drain on the body's heat budget. The flukes and flippers are, in this sense, thermally semi-independent from the core, a design that helps a warm-blooded animal survive in water that is often just a few degrees above freezing. The sheer scale of the blue whale's cardiovascular architecture serves as a reminder that the laws of biology do not simply scale up linearly as body size increases. Each increment of size brings new physical challenges that require new solutions. The blue whale's heart is not just a bigger version of a human heart or a horse's heart. It is a genuinely different kind of organ, shaped by selection pressures that have no parallel in any land animal. And it sits, right now, beating twice a minute in the chest of an animal moving silently through cold water. The slowest, largest, most powerful heart on the planet, doing its quiet work in the dark. Blue whales do not sing year-round with equal intensity. In most populations, calling activity increases markedly during certain seasons, drops off during others, and follows patterns that researchers have been trying to interpret for decades. In the Northern Hemisphere populations studied off California and in the Northeast Atlantic, calling is most intense in autumn and winter. In Southern Hemisphere populations, the peak tends to shift accordingly. This seasonality initially led researchers to assume the calls were primarily associated with mating, following the pattern of many other animals that vocalize most intensely when reproduction is most likely. But the picture has turned out to be considerably more complicated, and the neat explanation has not survived close scrutiny unchanged. Part of the complication is that blue whale mating has almost never been directly observed. We know it happens, obviously, because calves are born, but the circumstances, the locations, the social dynamics between males and females in the moments leading to mating remain almost entirely unknown. Blue whales do not appear to aggregate in traditional breeding grounds the way some other whale species do. They do not form obvious competitive male groups. Females with calves are sometimes seen, but gravid females ready to mate are rarely identified with certainty in the field. The mating system of the blue whale, whether it involves male-male competition, female choice, or some combination, is one of the more significant open questions in cetacean biology. The seasonality of calls might tell us something about where whales are and what they are doing at different times of year, even when we cannot observe them directly. Call frequency and intensity tend to be highest when whales are in transit, moving between feeding grounds and whatever other areas they occupy during the non-feeding season. This has led some researchers to propose that the calls function at least partly as long-range contact signals, helping dispersed individuals locate one another across the vast waters between seasonal destinations. The singing season may be, in this interpretation, the gathering season, the time when the ocean-spanning acoustic network of the species is most actively maintained. There is also an intriguing pattern in how call types vary over the year within a single population. Blue whales produce several recognizable call types, labeled by researchers with letters or numbers in different classification systems. Some call types appear to be more common at certain times of year. Some may be preferentially produced by males. Some appear to occur more frequently at night than during the day. Unpacking what these patterns mean requires long-term acoustic records, ideally from multiple listening stations across large ocean areas, combined with genetic data from the calling animals and behavioral data from tagging studies. Assembling all of this is the work of years, and the field is still mid-journey in that work. The singing itself, as a behavior, appears to be energetically costly. Males in other singing species, from songbirds to humpback whales, typically invest significant energy in vocal production over extended periods. Blue whale calls, produced at low frequency and high amplitude, require the movement of large quantities of air through the laryngeal structures of an animal that must also conserve its oxygen during dives. How blue whales produce these calls, given that they lack vocal cords in the traditional sense, is itself an ongoing area of investigation. Researchers believe the sounds are produced by a specialized structure within the larynx that vibrates as air is recycled internally, without the whale needing to exhale through the blowhole, meaning the calls are produced with no loss of the precious air supply. There is something almost philosophical about a creature whose singing season we have identified, but whose singing reasons we have not fully decoded. The calls are real. The seasonality is documented. The consistency across decades of recordings is clear. And yet the inner logic of when and why a particular whale begins to call on a particular day remains opaque to us. Some researchers describe this as one of the genuinely humbling aspects of studying an animal this large in an environment this vast. We can listen, and we can catalog, and we can find patterns, but the meaning behind the singing is still, in the most careful scientific language, incompletely understood. The ocean holds its secrets slowly. A blue whale calf is born after a gestation of roughly 10 to 12 months, and it enters the world at a size that would be remarkable for any other animal. A newborn blue whale is approximately 7 to 8 meters long and weighs around 2 to 3 tons. It begins nursing almost immediately, drinking up to 400 liters of mother's milk per day. The milk is extraordinarily rich in fat, roughly 40 to 50% fat by content, compared to about 4% in human breast milk, and the calf grows at a rate of up to 90 kilograms per day during the nursing period. By the time it is weaned, at around 7 or 8 months of age, it has roughly doubled in length and multiplied its birth weight many times over. This rate of growth is unmatched by any other animal on Earth. The relationship between a blue whale mother and her calf during this period is one of close proximity and continuous coordination. The calf stays near its mother almost constantly during the early months, tucked alongside her body, matching her swimming movements, surfacing when she surfaces. The physical closeness is partly practical. The calf must nurse frequently, and the act of nursing while swimming requires the two animals to maintain a precise relative position. But there appears to be more to their proximity than logistics. Calves observed in the field often seem to be attending closely to the mother's behavior, watching where she dives, how she responds to disturbances, what directions she travels. This suggests that some of what a calf learns about how to be a blue whale is transmitted through observation. What exactly does a blue whale calf need to learn? Quite a lot, it turns out, given the complexity of the life it will eventually lead. It must learn which feeding grounds are productive in which seasons, and how to navigate between them across ocean distances. It must learn in some form the acoustic conventions of its population, the call types that are used, the patterns that signal what. It must develop the physiological capacity for deep diving over time, as the diving ability of young whales appears to increase gradually rather than being fully present at birth. Some researchers believe that calves accompany their mothers to feeding grounds during their first summer, not yet capable of efficient lunge feeding themselves, but gaining familiarity with the locations and conditions that make those grounds productive. The period after weaning is not well documented. At around 7 or 8 months, the calf and mother separate, and the young whale enters a phase of juvenile life that researchers have been largely unable to observe. We know that juvenile blue whales are somewhat smaller and differently shaped than adults, their bodies proportionally narrower, their behavior presumably less experienced. We know that they eventually reach sexual maturity at around 5 to 15 years of age, depending on the population and the individual. But the intervening years of learning and growing are largely invisible to science. What a young blue whale does in its first years alone in the ocean, how it practices feeding, how it figures out the routes its mother shown it, who, if anyone, it travels with, remains one of the quieter mysteries of the species. There is evidence, slowly accumulating, that individual blue whales show consistent behavioral characteristics over time, patterns that researchers describe cautiously as personalities or individual styles. Some individuals show consistently bolder behavior around research vessels. Some appear to specialize in particular feeding strategies or prefer specific areas within their known range. If these differences are real and stable, they raise the possibility that some of what makes each whale distinctive is at least partly learned, shaped by early experiences, by the mother's behavior, by encounters in the ocean during formative months. The nature versus nurture question, usually the domain of psychology and behavioral ecology in smaller animals, applies here too, with all the same difficulty and all the same fascination. The mother herself, after weaning a calf, typically requires a recovery period before reproducing again. The energetic cost of pregnancy and nursing at this scale is enormous, and most females appear to rest from reproduction for at least 1 to 2 years before becoming pregnant again. In some populations, the interval between calves has been estimated at 2 to 3 years, meaning that a female blue whale who lives to 60 or 70 years of age, a reasonable estimate for the species, may produce only around 10 to 15 calves in her entire lifetime. Each calf is therefore a substantial biological investment, and the care given to each one reflects that. In a life measured in decades and a sea measured in millions of miles, every calf is a slow and precious beginning. Sleep is one of the most fundamental biological needs of any mammal, and yet for an animal that must breathe voluntarily and lives in open water, sleep presents a genuine physiological challenge. You cannot simply close your eyes and lose consciousness when losing consciousness means stopping breathing. Cetaceans have evolved a remarkable solution to this problem, known as unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, a state in which one half of the brain enters the slow, synchronized neural activity characteristic of sleep, while the other half remains awake, maintaining enough awareness to continue swimming, breathing, and monitoring the environment. Dolphins have been studied in this state extensively, and the evidence for something similar in whales is growing, though the details in blue whales specifically are harder to confirm. Some of the clearest evidence for rest behavior in blue whales comes from the detailed dive records produced by satellite tags. In these records, researchers occasionally observe extended periods of very shallow, slow, relatively undirected movement, usually at night, in which the whale hovers near the surface without undertaking the feeding dives that characterize its active periods. The animal is not clearly going anywhere or doing anything in particular. It is simply there, moving gently, surfacing regularly, its depth trace nearly flat on the record. These periods tend to last for 2 to 4 hours and then give way to the resumption of deeper, more purposeful activity. Whether this constitutes sleep in any neurological sense remains to be confirmed with the kind of brainwave measurements that have been made in dolphins and porpoises. Sperm whales have been observed in a distinctive resting posture, groups of animals floating nearly motionless at the surface, oriented vertically with their heads above water, in what researchers describe as a state of deep sleep that can last for up to 2 hours. These observations raise the intriguing possibility that large whales might sometimes sleep in ways that are more visible and more extended than the continuous shallow motion rest suggested by blue whale tagging data. No equivalent observation has been published for blue whales, and given the differences in their habitat and behavior, it would not be surprising if their rest patterns differ from those of sperm whales. But the question is open, and the image of a blue whale floating motionless in open ocean for a stretch of deep night hours is not, scientifically, out of the question. The body of a resting blue whale, even in reduced activity states, continues performing a great deal of work. The heart beats, the immune system operates, the brain processes whatever information the half of it that remains awake is receiving. Muscles that maintain posture and gentle locomotion continue their slow contractions. The digestive system processes whatever the animal ate before the rest period began. Rest, in this sense, is not absence of activity, but a reorganization of it, a shift in priority from the demanding external work of feeding and traveling to the quieter internal work of restoration and maintenance. Even in stillness, the blue whale is a busy organism. There is something appealing about imagining what a resting blue whale might be processing during those slow nighttime hours. Memories, if cetaceans form them in ways comparable to mammals, would include the locations of successful feeding bouts, the acoustics of other whales encountered along the route, the temperature and current patterns of the water through which it has recently passed. The brain, even while half asleep, is thought to consolidate information, reinforcing neural patterns that reflect recent experience. Whether a blue whale's brain does something analogous to this, whether its apparent rest period serves some role in organizing and storing the knowledge that guides its behavior, is one of those questions that sits at the edge of what current science can reach. The overall impression that emerges from what we know about blue whale rest is of an animal that is rarely fully still and never fully unconscious, cycling through states of varying alertness and activity in a continuous loop shaped by the demands of an open ocean life. In this sense, rest for a blue whale is less a discrete event and more a continuous background condition, a variable that modulates constantly but never reaches zero. There may be moments more restful and moments less so. There may be periods at the surface in the dark hours that come closest to what we would recognize as sleep. But the blue whale, like the ocean it lives in, does not fully stop. It simply slows for a while and breathes and drifts and then moves on. Blue whales are among the great travelers of the animal kingdom. Populations in the North Pacific have been tracked from their summer feeding grounds in productive upwelling zones off California and around the Aleutian Islands to winter areas near the equatorial Pacific and the waters off Mexico. Southern Hemisphere populations make similar journeys between Antarctic feeding grounds in summer and lower latitude winter areas. In the North Atlantic, blue whales have been documented moving between feeding areas in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and Iceland in summer, to waters off the Azores and parts of the tropical Atlantic in winter. These are journeys of thousands of miles, undertaken twice a year, often with remarkable directional consistency from year to year. The routes these migrations follow are not random. They appear to track oceanographic features, temperature fronts, current boundaries, upwelling zones, in ways that suggest the animals have a functional knowledge of large-scale ocean geography. Individual whales tagged repeatedly over multiple years have been shown to follow broadly consistent routes, returning to the same feeding areas with a fidelity that implies either memory, navigational precision, or both. Some researchers have noted that the routes themselves have remained consistent over the decades of observation available, suggesting they may represent traditions laid down over much longer timescales than any individual animal's lifetime. Migration routes passed from mother to calf across generations, etched not into maps, but into behavior. The question of how blue whales navigate these routes is one of the more open and genuinely interesting problems in the field. We know they use sound, and we suspect they use magnetic sensing and oceanographic gradients. But long-distance navigation across ocean basins with the precision that tagging data suggests likely requires the integration of multiple cues in a way that is more sophisticated than any single mechanism can explain. Some researchers have proposed that blue whales may use a cognitive map, a mental representation of large-scale space that allows them to plan routes rather than simply following immediate stimuli. Demonstrating the existence of such a map in any animal requires careful experimental work that is essentially impossible to do with free-ranging blue whales in the open ocean. The energetics of migration are themselves a study in biological economy. A blue whale traveling from Antarctic feeding grounds to lower latitude winter areas may cover 8,000 kilometers or more, largely on energy stored as blubber during the summer feeding season. The pace of travel is typically moderate, around 5 kilometers per hour on sustained transit, which minimizes energy expenditure per unit distance while maintaining forward progress. Some individuals appear to largely fast during migration and through the winter months when they are away from productive feeding grounds. The blubber layer built up during summer must carry them through, not just across the migration itself, but through a winter season when feeding is sparse or absent. The timing of departure from feeding grounds is therefore critical, with animals that fatten most effectively having the most flexibility. One of the more remarkable aspects of blue whale migration is how little social structure appears to accompany it. Unlike some migratory species that travel in cohesive groups, blue whales generally appear to migrate as individuals or in very loose associations that may be more coincidental than coordinated. The fact that they can cross thousands of miles of open ocean alone, navigating accurately to specific destinations without the benefit of a group to share navigational information with, points to a high degree of individual competence. Mothers traveling with calves represent an exception. The pair must stay together through the calf's first migration, which may be when some of the most important navigational learning takes place. The calf's brain encoding the geography of a route it will need to follow alone in years to come. The seasonal timing of blue whale migrations is closely linked to the predictable annual patterns of ocean productivity that make their feeding grounds worth visiting. As days lengthen in spring and summer, sunlight drives phytoplankton blooms in polar and subpolar waters, which fuel the krill populations the whales depend on. The whales arrive to match this peak, and they leave before the productivity collapses in autumn. This synchrony between whale phenology and ocean seasonality has been stable for a long time, but it is showing signs of pressure as ocean temperatures shift and the timing of seasonal productivity changes. Some populations have shown altered arrival and departure patterns in recent decades. The ancient routes remain, but the clocks they were calibrated to are quietly, slowly changing. Blue whales exist within a world defined by water chemistry and temperature in ways that most of us rarely consider. The ocean is not a uniform liquid. It is a layered, stratified, chemically complex medium in which temperature, salinity, oxygen content, and the concentrations of dozens of dissolved substances vary with depth, location, and season. Blue whales moving through this medium are continuously bathed in changing chemical and physical information, and there is growing evidence that they respond to this information in sophisticated ways that shape where they go and what they do. The ocean, from a blue whale's perspective, is not featureless space. It is a richly textured landscape, written in temperature and chemistry, rather than rock and soil. One of the most important temperature features in a blue whale's world is the thermocline, the layer where water temperature drops sharply with increasing depth. Above the thermocline, water is relatively warm and often nutrient-poor. Below it, water is colder and often richer in the nutrients that drive phytoplankton growth. Upwelling zones, where cold, deep water rises to the surface, are where thermocline waters break through into the sunlit zone, creating the conditions for phytoplankton blooms and downstream, the dense krill aggregations that blue whales seek. The location and intensity of these upwellings varies with ocean circulation patterns, wind conditions, and seasonal cycles. Blue whales track these variations with what appears to be impressive sensitivity, adjusting their movements to follow productive zones as they shift. Researchers have used the ocean temperature records embedded in satellite tags, which continuously measure the water temperature around the tagged animal, to reconstruct the thermal environments blue whales move through over time. These records reveal that individuals tend to seek specific temperature ranges during feeding, avoiding water that is too warm or too cold, and gravitating toward the thermal boundaries where krill tend to concentrate. Some animals show consistent thermal preferences that differ slightly from others in the same population, raising the possibility that individual experience shapes temperature-based habitat selection over time. A whale that has repeatedly found good feeding at a particular temperature front may learn to seek that temperature signature as a reliable indicator of productive water. The chemical composition of the water itself may also carry information that blue whales extract and use. Krill release chemical compounds as metabolic byproducts, and dense swarms leave a detectable chemical signature in the water around and downstream of them. Baleen whales are not traditionally thought of as having a sophisticated sense of taste or smell in the way that some other mammals do. Their olfactory anatomy appears reduced relative to their terrestrial ancestors. But the sensory cells in their mouths and possibly in other tissues may be sensitive to chemical gradients in ways that are not yet fully characterized. The idea that a blue whale might smell a krill swarm, in some functional sense, before it can detect it through hearing or vision, remains speculative but not implausible. There is a longer-term dimension to the blue whale's relationship with ocean temperature that researchers are increasingly focused on. Over the course of a single animal's lifetime, which may span 60 or more years, ocean temperatures in its home range can shift meaningfully. A whale born in the 1960s has lived through several decades of gradual ocean warming. The intensification of El Niño events, shifts in krill distribution, and changes in the timing of seasonal upwellings. Whether individual blue whales adjust behaviorally to these changes, drawing on accumulated experience to find food in a shifting landscape, or whether they rely more on fixed behavioral patterns that may no longer match current conditions, is a question with significant implications for how well the species can cope with ongoing environmental change. The memory of ocean temperatures in a blue whale is not a metaphor. It is something closer to a lived map of the productive places and seasons that a particular animal has encountered across its lifetime of travel. Each successful feeding bout at a particular kind of water adds detail to that map. Each failed search in unexpected conditions may revise it. The ocean is always changing, and the animal that navigates it successfully across decades must be, in some functional sense, a learner, an organism whose knowledge of the world is not static, but updated continuously by experience. In the enormous quiet of the deep ocean, the blue whale carries its map forward, one dive at a time. Most of what blue whales do happens in the top few hundred meters of the ocean, a zone that represents only a tiny fraction of the ocean's total depth. But blue whales are physiologically capable of much deeper dives than they routinely undertake, and occasion tagging records have shown individuals descending to 500 meters or more. These deeper dives appear to occur in specific circumstances, often in areas where krill are known to occupy deep layers during certain parts of the day. And they raise interesting questions about what the animal is doing and what it experiences at those depths. The deep ocean is a profoundly different environment from the productive shallows where most blue whale feeding occurs, and the animal's body must cope with very different pressures and conditions there. Pressure increases by 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth. At 300 meters, a blue whale is experiencing 30 times the pressure at the surface. At 500 meters, 50 times. The animal's body copes with this through a combination of physiological adaptations that begin before it even starts the dive. The lungs, unlike those of a human diver, do not simply compress and stop functioning under pressure. Blue whale lungs are relatively small for the animal's size and are designed to collapse gracefully at depth, allowing the remaining air to move into the non-absorbing upper airways where nitrogen cannot dissolve into the blood and cause the problems that afflict human divers. The flexible rib cage allows the chest wall to compress without injury. Deeper structures are protected by pressure equalizing mechanisms that cetacean biology has refined over millions of years. At depth, the quality of light changes dramatically. Below about 200 meters, there is essentially no functional daylight. The water is in what oceanographers call the mesopelagic zone, a twilight layer where photosynthesis cannot occur, and most visual navigation requires extraordinary sensitivity to very faint light, or relies on other senses entirely. Blue whales have relatively small eyes for their body size, and their visual acuity is not believed to be exceptional. In the deep, dark water of a feeding dive, they are navigating and hunting primarily through sound and possibly chemical senses, not vision. The world at depth, for a blue whale, may be experienced primarily as a landscape of sound gradients and water chemistry. The prey detectable not because it can be seen, but because it can be heard or sensed. Krill that inhabit the deeper layers during daytime appear as acoustic targets on the ship-mounted sonar systems used by researchers to survey prey distribution. These deep layers, sometimes called deep scattering layers because of their effect on sonar returns, can be extremely dense. Millions of krill and other small animals concentrated at depths that require a blue whale to extend its dive duration and depth significantly beyond what it typically does near the surface. The energetic trade-offs involved in these deep dives are more complex. The whale must carry more oxygen, stay down longer, and recover more completely at the surface before the next dive. Whether the deeper krill are sufficiently dense to make the additional investment worthwhile depends on conditions that vary day to day and location to location. One of the things that tagging data has revealed about deep blue whale dives is a behavior that researchers call bounce diving, a pattern in which the whale descends steeply to a target depth, remains there briefly for what appears to be a feeding lunge or two, and then ascends steeply again without the extended time at depth that characterizes more sustained feeding bouts. These bounce dives suggest that the whale is making a rapid assessment of prey density at depth before committing more energy to extended feeding there. If the krill are sufficiently dense, it may continue diving. If not, it may move horizontally to test a different area. This kind of adaptive sampling behavior requires the whale to be making real-time decisions about foraging strategy based on what it encounters, rather than following a fixed behavioral script. The sensory experience of a blue whale at depth is something we can only partially reconstruct from external measurements and behavioral observation. We know the physics of the environment, the pressure, the darkness, the cold, the acoustic properties of water at that depth. We can observe what the animal does through tagging records. But what it is like to be a blue whale in those moments, 300 or 400 meters below the surface, in near total darkness, moving through cold water toward a dense cloud of krill visible through some sensory modality we do not fully understand, is genuinely beyond our current capacity to know. There are limits to what observation from outside can tell us about experience from within. And perhaps that is as it should be. Some things belong to the whale and to the dark water it moves through, and we are only ever visitors at the edge of its world. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 blue whales in the world's oceans. By 1967, when the International Whaling Commission finally extended full protection to blue whales globally, the population had been reduced to somewhere between 400 and 1,000 individuals, a collapse of over 99% in just a few decades. This is one of the most dramatic population declines ever recorded for any large animal in modern history, and it unfolded with a speed that was only possible because of the industrialization of whaling in the early 20th century. The invention of the exploding harpoon, the steam-powered catcher vessel, and the factory ship made it possible to hunt and process blue whales at a scale that their slow reproductive rate had no capacity to absorb. Understanding why the collapse happened so completely requires understanding the economics of industrial whaling at the time. Blue whales, as the largest animal on Earth, yielded the most oil per carcass of any whale species. Each animal could produce up to 120 barrels of oil, used for everything from margarine to machinery lubrication in an era before petroleum products had fully taken over. Fleets competed intensely in the Southern Ocean and other blue whale habitat areas, taking thousands of animals per year during peak decades. The population plummeted in a well-documented trajectory that closely followed the predictions of what happens when a slow reproducing species is harvested far above its capacity to replace losses. The numbers were not difficult to understand in principle, but the incentive structures of an unregulated international industry did not reward restraint. The global protection of blue whales in 1966 and 1967 was an important threshold, but it was not the end of the story. Some populations have shown signs of gradual recovery in the decades since. The population along the coast of California has been estimated at around 2,000 individuals and appears to have been growing slowly. Populations in the Gulf of St. Lawrence have also shown encouraging trends, but other populations remain at critically low levels, and the species as a whole is still classified as endangered. Recovery for an animal that matures slowly and produces only one calf every 2 to 3 years is inherently a multi-generational process, a matter of decades at minimum, and possibly centuries before the species approaches anything like its historical abundance. The recovery of blue whales also faces ongoing challenges that go beyond the cessation of direct hunting. Ship strikes are now recognized as a significant source of mortality. Blue whales surfacing in busy shipping lanes can be struck by large vessels moving at speeds that give neither party time to avoid the other. Entanglement in fishing gear poses additional risks in some areas. Noise pollution from shipping and industrial activity degrades the acoustic environment in which blue whales communicate and navigate. And ocean warming is reshaping the distribution of the krill on which they depend, potentially reducing the reliability of feeding grounds that populations have depended on for generations. Protection from hunting was a necessary step. It has not been a sufficient one. There is, despite all of this, a current of cautious optimism in the blue whale research community. The California population's recovery suggests that when conditions are favorable and threats are managed, blue whales can slowly rebuild. Acoustic monitoring networks that span entire ocean basins have made it possible to track population presence and calling activity in ways that were impossible a generation ago. International cooperation on shipping lane management, particularly in areas like the Santa Barbara Channel off California, has reduced ship strike rates. Researchers and conservation organizations have learned a great deal about which threats matter most in which regions, allowing for more targeted and effective interventions. The work is slow, like the animal itself, but it continues. Perhaps the most important thing to understand about blue whale recovery is how much depends on timescales that are difficult for human institutions to maintain focus on. A female blue whale born today might not reproduce until 2035 or 2040, and her reproductive contribution to population recovery will unfold over the subsequent 50 years. Conservation decisions made today will not show their full effects until generations of humans have come and gone. This requires a kind of long-term thinking that does not come naturally to systems built around election cycles and quarterly reports. The blue whale's recovery is, in this sense, a test of whether humans can commit to caring for something on timescales longer than our own attention naturally sustains. The whale does not know this, of course. It simply swims on, as it always has, through its ancient and continuing sea. There is a class of sound that the human ear cannot detect, but that the human body can sometimes feel. At frequencies below about 20 Hertz, pressure waves in air or water are too slow for the ear's mechanical structures to convert into the neural signals we experience as sound. But these infrasonic waves still exist, still carry energy, and still interact with the world in physical ways. Elephants use infrasound to communicate across kilometers of savanna, and researchers studying them found, partly by observing the inexplicable calm that can precede the arrival of a distant herd, that infrasound was detectable by human observers as a vague physical sensation before it could be consciously heard. Blue whale calls, which fall squarely in the infrasonic range, may interact with the bodies of both the animals that produce them and any other large organisms nearby, in ways that go beyond simple acoustic communication. The production of infrasonic calls by a blue whale is accompanied by physical vibrations that must travel through the animal's own body. The structures involved in call production, presumably involving the recycling of air through laryngeal folds without exhalation, create pressure waves that propagate outward through the water, but also inward through the whale's tissues. Some researchers have speculated that the physical sensation of these vibrations traveling back through the animal's own body from the surrounding water as echoes might provide the whale with some form of feedback about the call's characteristics and travel. This is speculative, and the anatomy of the blue whale's vibration sensing systems in this context is not well characterized. But the idea that the whale does not simply produce a call and send it away, but in some sense feels its own voice, has an appealing resonance. For prey animals caught in the presence of a calling blue whale, the physical impact of infrasonic pressure waves may be significant. Krill, despite their small size, have pressure-sensitive organs and respond to mechanical stimulation in the water around them. Whether blue whale calls have any direct effect on krill behavior, whether they scatter or aggregate in response to infrasound, is an open research question. It would be energetically counterproductive for a feeding whale to advertise its presence acoustically to prey that might flee in response. But the same calls that might disperse nearby krill could potentially have no effect on krill farther away, and the net balance between communication benefits and prey alerting costs would depend on the specific geometry of any given situation. Nature tends to find equilibria in these trade-offs, even when we haven't yet fully mapped them. Ocean noise from human activity has changed the acoustic environment in which blue whale infrasound travels. Low-frequency shipping noise now fills ocean basins at levels that were essentially zero before the mid-20th century. This noise overlaps in frequency with blue whale calls and can reduce the distance over which calls are detectable by other whales. Estimates of how much this has reduced effective communication range vary depending on assumptions about background noise levels and whale hearing sensitivity. But some models suggest the effective range may have been reduced from potentially thousands of kilometers to hundreds in some ocean basins. What effect this reduction in acoustic reach has on blue whale social behavior, mate finding, and population connectivity is difficult to measure directly, but it is a concern that runs through much of the current research on cetacean conservation. Blue whale infrasound also interacts with the physical structure of the ocean in ways that produce complex interference patterns. The SOFAR channel, the deep water acoustic waveguide that allows low-frequency sound to travel exceptional distances, does not transmit all frequencies equally or in all directions with equal efficiency. The topography of the seafloor, the temperature and salinity structure of the water column, and even the presence of submarine ridges and seamounts all shape how a blue whale's call propagates through the ocean. A whale calling from one position may be audible at a distant listening station, but not at a closer one in a different direction, depending on the acoustic geometry of the region. Understanding this complex propagation landscape is essential for using acoustic monitoring data to draw accurate conclusions about whale abundance and distribution. There is something quietly profound about the fact that the primary voice of the largest animal on Earth is a sound that we cannot hear without instruments. The blue whale fills the ocean with sound that was present for millions of years before any human being ever existed to fail to hear it. The ocean was resonant with blue whale calls when our ancestors were still living in forests. It continues to resonate with them now in the deep water below the shipping lanes and the fishing zones and the warming surface layers, in a layer of the acoustic world that most of us will never directly experience. But it is there, a slow, deep pulse of life in the dark water, carrying across distances that make human communication seem almost local. The whale speaks, the ocean listens, and somewhere far away, another whale hears. Blue whales live long lives. Exactly how long is still uncertain, because the methods for aging large whales are difficult and were developed only relatively recently. One technique involves counting the layers of earwax that accumulate in the ear canal over a whale's lifetime, similar to counting tree rings. These earplugs, as researchers call them, preserve a chemical record of the whale's hormones, pollutants, and stress markers at each layer, and the number of layers provides a minimum estimate of the animal's age. Analyses of earplug samples from stranded and historical specimens have suggested that some blue whales may live to at least 80 to 90 years, with the possibility that the oldest individuals could be older still. The maximum lifespan of the species remains, in the most technically accurate sense, unknown. Photo identification, the practice of recognizing individual whales from the unique patterns of scars, pigmentation, and fin shape visible in photographs, has allowed researchers to follow some individuals across multiple decades. The longest ongoing blue whale photo ID studies, in the waters off California and in the St. Lawrence estuary, have accumulated records spanning more than 30 years, and some individuals have been recognized across most of that span. These long-term records reveal something important. Individual blue whales are not interchangeable units within a population. They have histories. They show up in the same places across decades. They change, subtly, their markings shifting as new scars accumulate, their behavior perhaps adapting to the changing ocean around them. They are, in a quietly undeniable sense, individuals. The oldest known blue whales carry within their bodies a compressed history of the ocean's recent past. An animal now in its 70s was born in the early 1950s, before the end of the most intensive period of industrial whaling. It grew up in an ocean with far fewer of its own kind than had existed a generation before. It experienced the cessation of whaling and whatever gradual changes in ocean acoustics that brought as the population slowly grew. It lived through decades of shipping intensification, of ocean warming, of the changes to krill distribution that have unfolded in its lifetime. Its earplugs carry a chemical record of all of this, layer by layer, a biography written in wax and hormones, and the residue of the ocean it has moved through for 7 decades. The reproductive life of a female blue whale spans much of her adult existence, with first reproduction estimated at somewhere between 5 and 15 years of age, and the last potentially occurring well into her later decades. Across a long life, a successful female might produce 10 to 15 calves, each representing a 2 to 3 year investment of energy and attention. The calves she raises carry her behavioral traditions, her navigational knowledge, her acoustic culture into the next generation. In this way, the death of an old, experienced female whale is not simply the loss of one individual. It is the potential loss of accumulated knowledge that may have taken decades to build and that cannot be easily reconstructed or replaced. There is a concept in conservation biology called the ghost of knowledge past. The idea that when a population has been heavily reduced, the experienced individuals who once held and transmitted behavioral traditions are gone, and even if the population recovers numerically, it may be missing the cultural information that allowed it to fully exploit its habitat. Blue whale populations recovering from whaling are in a sense rebuilding not just their numbers, but their cultural memory, the roots, the feeding ground locations, the acoustic conventions that experienced individuals carry and transmit to the young. Recovery is therefore not just a demographic process, it is a cultural one, and it may take longer than the numbers alone would suggest. The life of a blue whale, measured in its decades of quiet movement through the deep ocean, is one of the more remarkable sustained performances in the natural world. It requires navigating thousands of miles with precision, finding food in a dynamic and shifting environment, communicating across ocean basins, raising young on a multi-year schedule, and adjusting behavior to circumstances that change across timescales from daily to decadal. All of this unfolds without the visible drama of terrestrial predator-prey interactions, without the social complexity of primate groups, without the obvious behavioral richness that makes mammals like elephants or dolphins so immediately legible to human observers. The blue whale's life is deep and slow and largely hidden from us, but it is, in every way that matters, full, and we drift gently back toward the surface, toward the quiet of this room and the warmth of where you are lying now. The ocean is still there, somewhere in the back of your mind, dark and wide and alive, and somewhere in it, a blue whale is moving through the dark, calling across a distance we can barely imagine, breathing once and slipping back beneath the surface. Its heart beats twice, a minute passes, the ocean holds it gently. You have traveled far tonight, without moving at all. You have heard the sound below sound, felt the slow beat of the largest heart that has ever existed, and drifted alongside an animal that has been finding its way across this changing world for longer than our own species has been counting the years. There is something deeply restful in that thought, that the ocean was already ancient when we arrived, and that something this quiet and this enormous has been moving through it all along. Let your breathing slow now, the way the ocean slows at depth. Let the sounds of the room settle around you like still water. And if you happen to still be awake, the story will be here again, patient and unhurried, whenever you need it. Good night.